The year was 1991. I was in 3rd grade, and my older sister was in 5th. We attended an elementary school that was just a few blocks away from our childhood home, and we lived one street over from my grandparents. Our neighborhood had a lot of children, and there were usually adults outside working in the garden or fixing cars. One day after we were dropped off, we decided to go visit our grandfather. My grandparents' house had a huge privacy fence. We would drop in from time to time, but if the gate was locked, we would just turn around and go home. As we were about to cross the street, we saw a man blocking our path, staring us down. The man looked like he benched semi-trucks in his spare time. Aside from us and the brute, the streets were completely deserted. If we cried out for help, I don't think there was anyone outside that would hear us. Just our luck. The one day our street is empty, we encounter a steroid-addicted lunatic. The man began charging toward us. "You two are coming with me." That was our cue to start running. Due to a recent surgery that I had on my ankle, I was having trouble keeping up, so my sister put me on her shoulders and bolted down an alley that led back to our house. We raced to the front door and began beating on it. But nobody was home. We looked behind us as the man emerged from the alley. Just then, our next-door neighbor, who was an older woman, came outside to see what the commotion was. She was holding a shotgun in her hands. She saw how frightened we were, and then looked at the imposing man coming toward us. She instantly put 2 and 2 together. She raised her gun. "You leave these kids alone, or say goodbye to your manhood." The man stopped in his tracks, raised his hands in the air, then slowly backed away, eventually disappearing down the alley. My sister called the cops, and then our dad. The police never found out who that man was, although there were some other abductions of children around our area, which were suspected to be linked to human trafficking. I am very thankful that our neighbor intervened with her BFG that day. Otherwise, my sister and I could have been abducted.
It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended, we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader told us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed was positioned next to the window. He tried to scare us by saying in those rooms, ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back to the East Ikebukuro hotel. We check in the early evening, and the first thing we notice is how small the room was. The second thing was, they gave us a double bed instead of 2 singles. The third, the bed head was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small really to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of shit. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed. We decided to let it go since it was just for one night. So we went out for dinner before turning in for the night. That night, I get woken up by a door slamming shut and I jolt up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair, and from what I could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out, dive, and bury my head under my pillow. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius, I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed, thinking if I don't touch anything, it's just my imagination. Little by little, my foot moves down the bed, when I notice that there's definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Someone or something was there. I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point, just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer till I must have fainted or fallen back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning, and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night, and all he says is, "I don't want to talk about it. Let's check out." I was backpacking through Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina with my dog. Just the two of us, and we were exploring the woods around Little Lost Cove, open orienteering style, so we were not on an established trail. We'd been hiking throughout the day following a creek, and toward the evening, I noticed my dog was acting abnormally. She was very much caught in a scent of something and wouldn't ease up. This continued for about 2 hours before we made camp. That night in camp, she remained on edge and staring off into the wood line. I went about camp business as usual. Then, at around midnight, I got this prickle like I was being watched intently. I let the feeling ride for a bit and kept tinkering with the fire. Then I heard the brush rustle. I got up from the fire and shone my flashlight up in the hillside. A figure on all fours just managed to escape the beam, all but the tail. It was a tail I knew was not supposed to still exist in the southern Appalachians. I cast my light again across the hillside, and this time I caught its eyes. 2 glowing yellow orbs, just watching and waiting. At this point, I went into a fury, grabbed my tomahawk, and charged up the hill after the beast, screaming curses all the while. The watcher ran off. The following morning, we left camp at first light and began hiking up the mountain to the ridgeline which would lead us out. Atop the ridgeline, in the fresh mud, were a series of tracks left by an animal that officially no longer exists in the eastern U.S. They were catamount tracks. They commonly go by cougars in the east, but we'd been stalked by a mountain lion just the same. Those tracks ran across the ridge, revealing that it had been watching and stalking us throughout the previous day as we hiked through the creek bed below. I truly believe that if my dog hadn't given me red flags, I would have been mauled that night.